We live in a society where everyone wants to be heard, where opinions multiply, where every gesture and every word is exposed all the time. But in the midst of so much talk, who is really listening? Who is paying attention to what matters? True power lies in knowing when to keep quiet, because it is in silence that we find clarity, focus, and strength. When you decide to stop justifying yourself, speaking without thinking, responding on impulse, you begin to listen to the most important voice. Stoicism teaches us that in order to conquer, we must learn to control our own impulses, speak less, act more. And often, true strength comes from silence, that space between what happens and what you choose to do with it. You want to master your life, so start by mastering your words. Use silence as your greatest weapon. It is in silence that you find your path. Before you begin, I want you to do something important. Go to the comments and write, "Today I take another step towards the best version of myself." It seems simple, but it is much deeper than you think. By writing this sentence, you are making a commitment to your own evolution. Let's start. Number 1. Be silent to find a direction. Have you ever tried to be silent for 5 minutes? Without music, without a cell phone, without talking? Just sitting or standing, facing your own inner world. It seems simple, but when you try, you discover that time stretches, that your body becomes restless, that your mind screams. And then the inevitable question arises: why is it so difficult to be silent? Because silence strips us bare. It tears apart distractions, dismantles disguises, reveals what we spend our lives trying to ignore. In silence, the thoughts that you have pushed to the back of your mind begin to emerge. Insecurities take shape, doubts gain voice. The pains that you swept under the rug finally look you in the eye. The external noise that we seek so much, the notifications, the short videos, the shallow conversations, the constant commitments often serve as an escape, an elegant disguise to avoid facing the chaos that lives within. But the Stoic does not run away. He stops, he faces, he dives in. Epictetus wrote, "If someone speaks ill of you and it is true, correct yourself. If it is a lie, laugh." This phrase at first glance may seem simple, but it holds immense power. Self-control, calmness in the face of criticism, emotional clarity. And all of this only comes from one place, inner silence, because it is there that you listen to yourself sincerely. It is there that you stop reacting automatically and begin to choose consciously. Only in silence can you clearly perceive what is moving you. Are you being guided by anger, by envy, by fear, or by clarity? By a sense of justice, by purpose? When you react on impulse, you are handing over your power to someone else. You are allowing the moment to guide you, allowing your emotions to decide for you. But when you choose to remain silent, observe, and breathe, you regain that power. You position yourself as the author of your own reaction. In the modern world, this is almost a revolutionary act. Think of great leaders, true sages, those who do not need to raise their voices to be respected. These are people who do not rush to respond, who do not drown themselves in proving something. They listen more, observe more, feel the moment, and then speak. And when they speak, they are heard, because conscience has weight. And the weight of conscience only arises from the habit of reflecting before acting. Silence has become, curiously, a form of rebellion in times of urgency, of excessive opinions, of forced exposure. Those who choose are those who choose to live with more direction. But be careful. Silence is not hiding, it is not omitting. Stoic silence is active, conscious. It is not passivity, it is strategy. It is the intelligence to know that speaking less often means speaking better. It is the maturity to understand that not every criticism deserves a response, nor every mistake made by others deserves correction. Not every conversation is worth your energy. The Stoic mind knows this. It knows that many battles are won with posture, not with words, with a silent attitude, with firm serenity. Do you want to grow? Do you want to truly mature? Then start by observing how you react. What is your first impulse when faced with unfair criticism, an emotional challenge, or a provocative comment? Most people react. Few choose. And success, contrary to what they say, is not the result of a perfect reaction. It is the fruit of a well-defined direction. And direction requires pause, requires listening, requires presence. The next time something bothers you, try it. Breathe. Don't say anything. Just observe what you are feeling, what you want to respond to, because it affects you so much. Give it time. Give space between what affects you and what you decide to do with it. This space, this silent pause, is the beginning of self-control, and self-control is the basis of all freedom, all growth, all real success. In silence, you begin to listen to yourself, and when you truly listen, you begin to master not others but yourself. And those who master themselves do not need to master anything else. In silence, you become your own master. In noise, you are just another person, reacting on impulse, trying to prove that you are someone. And in the end, tell me honestly, do you want to be recognized or to be invincible? Number 2. When you talk less, you see more. Have you ever noticed how the wisest people in a conversation are usually the ones who talk the least? They listen attentively, observe everything, weigh every word, and when they speak, it is impossible not to pay attention. It is not because their voice is louder, but because it comes from a deeper place. There is a different presence in these people. They are not trying to prove themselves or win an argument or fill the space. They are there, whole, conscious, absorbing what is happening around them. Their silence is not absence, it is strength and dominance in a world where everyone wants to be heard. True power lies in knowing how to listen. Listening not only with your ears, but with your eyes, with your body, with a quiet mind. When you are silent, you notice gestures that you previously ignored, tones of voice that reveal more than words, looks that say everything without saying anything. Seneca said, "While we teach, we learn. But before teaching and before learning, we must listen." And listening requires more than attention. It requires humility, because listening without rushing to respond means accepting that you may not know everything, that there may be something there that can transform you. But most people are so busy maintaining an image, defending an opinion, repeating ready-made phrases that they forget to look around and notice what is really happening. How many times have you left a conversation feeling like you said too much and said too little? Or that you missed an opportunity because you didn't stop to really listen? How many times has pride spoken louder than wisdom? Silence is a patient teacher. It teaches you to see beyond the words, to listen to the energy behind speech, to identify patterns that repeat themselves in relationships, in conflicts, in your own reactions. It gives you time to realize where you are stepping before taking the next step. And the more you practice silence, the more you develop a strategic outlook. You begin to understand who speaks out of fear, who speaks to manipulate, who speaks to hide the truth. You begin to notice that sometimes shouting comes from weakness and silence comes from trust. The Stoic mind knows that not every battle needs to be fought. Some are won by simply deciding not to get involved, and for that you need vision. And to have vision, you need silence. Silence is a filter. It separates the essential from the noise. It removes the fog from your decisions. It shows you what is worth your time, your energy, your response. Do you want a lighter, clearer, more lucid life? Talk less, see more, talk less, and you will realize that most fights do not deserve an answer, that most judgments have nothing to do with you, that most pressures come from outside, but only gain strength when they find an echo within. In silence, you learn that you can choose what affects you, that you can listen without absorbing, that you can see everything, but react only to what really matters. And then in this place, you stop being reactive and start being strategic, because those who see more decide better, and those who decide better go further, more lightly, more consistently, with fewer regrets. So try today now. Instead of responding impulsively, keep quiet. Instead of judging, observe. Instead of explaining yourself, breathe and see what happens. Number 3, use silence as your strongest response. Silence is not always peace. Sometimes it is the sword. And I am not talking about the silence that represses or swallows what you feel. I am talking about a conscious, chosen, sharp silence, the one you use when you understand that responding is not worth your time, that arguing leads to nothing, that proving something to someone is the quickest way to lose yourself. How many times have you been provoked by someone who just wanted to throw you off balance? How many times have you fallen into the trap of explaining too much, justifying yourself too much, trying to convince someone who had already closed their ears? The truth is that not every attack deserves a response. Not every criticism deserves an explanation. And silence in these moments is not weakness. It is emotional superiority. Marcus Aurelius said, "The best revenge is to be different from what hurt you." And silence is often this difference. When you remain silent in the face of venom, you show that you are not on the same level. When you do not respond to disrespect, you make it clear that you will not lower your value to fit anyone's expectations. But this requires courage, and above all self-control, because the natural impulse is to fight back, to defend your honor, your image, your reason. But when you act on impulse, the one in control is not you. It is the other person. It is the situation. It is the wounded ego. The Stoic mind trains the opposite. It observes, analyzes, and only then chooses whether it is worth acting. This is often the best choice. It is silence. Silence as a refusal. Silence as a strategy. Silence as an assertion of power. It is not being negligent. It is being selective. It is understanding that your focus is more important than your reputation in the eyes of those who do not want to understand you. It is knowing that your energy is limited, and that wasting it on someone who does not want to grow with you is sabotaging yourself. But be careful. Silence can also be cruel if used as an escape. If you keep quiet to avoid conflicts that need to be faced. If you keep quiet in the face of injustice because you are afraid to take a stand. If you use silence to manipulate, then it ceases to be a virtue and becomes poison. That is why Stoic silence is always conscious. It comes from within, not from a blockage but from a mastery. It knows when silence is wisdom and when speaking is necessary. You do not need to explain who you are to everyone, nor do you need to defend yourself from everything they say. The more mature you become, the less need you feel to convince anyone of anything. Your actions speak, your peace speaks, your constancy speaks. And silence screams. It says, "I don't need to prove anything." So the next time someone provokes you or you feel that urge to respond quickly, try to keep quiet, not out of fear, but out of strength. Silence can be the strongest response. That's when you begin to understand this. You free yourself, because then no one forces you to react anymore. You stop being a puppet and become master number 4. When silence heals what haste hurts. There is a type of pain that we only feel when everything stops, when the noise ends, when the world slows down and what's left is you naked in front of what isn't yet healed. That's why so many people run away from silence. It shows what haste hides. It reveals the wounds that rushing only pushes under the rug. But what is not seen is not healed. We live in a rhythm where stopping seems like failure, where resting is almost a sin, where reflecting has become a luxury. We are constantly encouraged to act, to run, to respond, to post, to produce, to win. As if the value of life were always in what we do, never in what we feel. And that is where Stoicism comes in as a silent, almost whispered invitation. Stop, breathe, observe. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome and master of introspection, wrote in his Meditations, "Return within yourself." The soul has a retreat that is always accessible. This retreat is silence, and it is not easy to inhabit. At first, it brings discomfort, memories, doubts, feelings that you would rather avoid. But if you endure it, if you stay a little longer, it begins to transform. Silence becomes a balm, a space for reconnection, a place where you finally listen to yourself without judgment, where the body speaks, the mind lets go, the soul breathes. And in this space, clarity is born. You start to realize that you were fighting for things you didn't want, pleasing people who don't even see you, running down paths that don't even make sense anymore. You start to remember who you were before the tiredness, the comparison, the anxiety disguised as ambition. Silence over time brings you back to yourself, but for that, you need courage. Courage to pause without guilt. Courage to listen to what you feel, not just what the world demands. Courage to no longer hide behind the "I'm busy," the "I can't stop now," the "later." I see this because time doesn't wait, and the wounds you don't take care of become walls, burdens, patterns that repeat themselves. Do you want to grow, evolve, be truly strong? So stop ignoring what hurts. Stop filling all the silence with distractions. Stop running away from yourself with toxic productivity. Sometimes the best way to simply be silent is to let your heart speak, without a filter, without rushing, without fear. Write, walk, breathe, be silent, and see what emerges. See what needs attention. See what you are trying to solve on the outside, but that will actually only heal on the inside. Haste hurts what only silence can heal. So create that space, defend that time, because no one is going to do it for you. And in the end, when the pain calms down, when clarity returns, when you reconnect, you realize the silence. It wasn't a punishment, it was an invitation. Accepting that invitation changes everything. I feel silence as the art of not explaining yourself. Perhaps one of the greatest temptations of our generation is the need to explain ourselves all the time, justify every choice, respond to every criticism, give context to everything as if our value were constantly being judged. But let me ask you, do you want to be understood, or do you want to be free? Because freedom sometimes is simply not responding, not defending yourself, not giving in to the urgency of being accepted by someone who isn't even willing to truly listen to you. There is immense power in looking someone in the eye, listening to whatever it is and simply not reacting, not with anger, not with irony, not with justification, just silence. A complete, safe, and unshakable silence. The ego, of course, will scream, will ask for a stage, will say you're going to leave it like that. But the conscience answers yes, because that doesn't define me. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to what happens. That matters." And sometimes the most powerful reaction is none at all. Don't confuse this with pride or indifference. Silence here is maturity. It's not stepping into the arena every time someone calls you. It's not wasting energy explaining your path to someone who wouldn't even walk with you. Explaining yourself all the time means living defensively and trying to control other people's perceptions, which, let's face it, is a losing battle. People see based on what they carry, and often what they see in you says more about them than it does about you. So why keep trying to adjust other people's lenses? The Stoic mind learns to sustain its own path in silence, not out of weakness, but out of focus. It understands that there is unnecessary wear and tear in trying to be understood by those who do not want to understand. And even more, that constant explanation is a hole through which your authenticity leaks. Do you want to live a true life? Then accept that not everyone will understand your choices. And that's okay. Silence can also say I am at peace with what I have decided, or I do not need to convince anyone. And it does indeed speak. Over time, actions become clearer than any speech, and those who need to explain themselves less live, more lightly. The next time you feel pressured to justify yourself, breathe. Ask yourself, is this explanation to clarify or to please? If it is just to maintain an image, to avoid judgment, to fit in where you no longer fit, then perhaps silence is the most sincere path, because silence is not the absence of an answer. It is often the most complete answer. Those who do not explain themselves too much protect their peace, and those who protect their peace protect everything. 6. When silence increases your authority. Have you ever noticed how some people can dominate a room without saying almost anything? They do not need to raise their voices, interrupt, or seek approval. They arrive and somehow everyone feels their presence speaks for them. And the most curious thing is that they say little, because true authority does not come from volume. It comes from consistency. It comes from what you do when no one is looking, from the firmness with which you live your choices, from the alignment between what you think, feel, and do. Silence in this context is a solid presence. It is energy that is not rushed, that is not explained, that is not compared. Seneca with the clarity of someone who saw beyond. He who is brave and free said. And silence is often the most courageous act, because it demands security, it demands trust. It demands knowing who you are without depending on the reaction of others to confirm it. In a world where almost everyone talks too much, silence creates contrast. It imposes rhythm. It separates you from the ordinary. Think about it. How many times have you seen someone trying to impose themselves by shouting, and all they conveyed was desperation? Well-positioned silence, on the other hand, conveys conviction, shows that you are not there to prove anything. You are there to live your truth. The Stoic mind understands that speaking can be useful, but silence in many cases is more powerful, because those who remain silent out of dominance listen more. Those who listen more understand better, and those who understand better lead with more clarity. Silent authority is built over time behind the scenes in the details. It is in the way you behave, in difficult moments, in self-control, when it would be easier to explode, in the firmness of saying no without needing to justify yourself, in the serenity in the face of criticism. When you learn to be silent, not out of fear, but out of strength, you become someone others notice, because your presence carries something that cannot be rehearsed. True. And here is a crucial point. Authority is not a gift, it is a habit. It is the result of small choices, repeated with discipline. And silence, this internal space of self-control and listening, is the foundation where it all begins. The next time you are in an important conversation, in a meeting, in a moment of conflict, try not to be the first to speak. Wait, observe. Let others show who they are, and only then, if necessary, say the essential. You will realize that the more you control your silence, the more impact your words have. Because it is not how much you say that impresses, it is how much you live, what you say. And when what you live is coherent, silence becomes a natural authority. Without forcing, without proving, without shouting, you are simply number 7, the silence that protects you from your own impulses. How many times have you regretted something you said in the heat of the moment? That blunt response, the thoughtless criticism, the revelation made without care, words thrown like stones that later become wounds that are difficult to heal. And the cruelest thing is that the damage is often internal. You speak and then blame yourself. Speak and feel like you have betrayed yourself. That is why silence is not just a communication practice. It is an emotional defense, a shield against your own impulses. The Stoic understands this very well. He knows that speaking in anger is giving voice to chaos, that when you speak without thinking, you are letting your emotional state decide for you. And every impulse that dominates hurts. Epictetus said, "No free person is the slave of his passions." And if there is something that silence offers, it is the chance to observe before acting, to give space between what affects you and what you do with it. This space is sacred. It is where freedom lives. In practice, this means when faced with criticism, pause when faced with provocation, breathe when faced with anger. Do not respond immediately. Give time, even if it is only seconds, because what you say in those seconds can change everything. Modern life has pushed us towards instant reaction. Everything has to be now. Message, response, opinion. There is a collective rush that confuses speed with clarity. But wisdom lies in the delay, in the pause, in the moment of silence between feeling and doing. And this silence is not passivity. It is emotional intelligence in its purest form. Do you want to be someone who controls their own life? Then start by controlling your own words. Start by noticing how an impulse wants to take control and choose not to feed it. Choose to remain silent if necessary until lucidity returns. It is impressive how, after a few minutes, what seemed urgent loses its importance. Anger cools, pride recedes. The response that seemed necessary dissolves in time, and what is left is maturity, self-control, strength. Silence is the moment when you save yourself from yourself, and this, in the end, is more liberating than winning any argument. You don't need to speak up every time something hits you, nor do you need to defend yourself from every criticism, nor prove your worth in every conversation. When you control your impulse, you show yourself that you are on a new level, a level where peace weighs more than ego. So the next time you feel the urge to respond, to shout, to react in a hurry, to throw words out without thinking, choose silence. Not the silence that represses, but the silence that protects. The silence that holds the hand of your most impulsive self and says, calm down, it's not time yet. Because sometimes, that's what growing up is all about. Knowing that you could say a lot of things, but you choose to say nothing. Number 8. Silence as a catalyst for focus. Have you ever noticed how easily your mind gets distracted? All it takes is a sound, a notification, a side conversation, and there goes your attention. Concentration has become a luxury item, and the more noise on the outside, the more distraction on the inside. But Stoicism reminds us that what you feed grows. And if you feed distraction all day long, there's no point in expecting focus when it's time to make a decision. That's why silence is so necessary, not as isolation from the world, but as a daily practice of coming back to yourself, a training to learn to be whole in one thing at a time. Seneca, with his sharp mind, said, "Part of the cure is the desire to be cured, and silence is the space where this desire manifests itself, where you stop running and truly start to organize yourself inside. Because without silence, there is no focus, and without focus, you cannot build anything solid. You can even start 1,000 things, but you don't finish any of them. You can consume tons of content, but you don't assimilate anything. You can be surrounded by opportunities, but you don't see any of them clearly. Noise confuses you, silence aligns you. Imagine your mind as a room full of voices. Every notification and every anxious thought, every useless comment and a voice shouting inside that room. Now imagine that you start to silence them one by one. Little by little there is space. The light enters, you breathe, and you can finally see what was there all along. This is focus. The ability to see clearly what really matters. And silence is the environment where this clarity happens. You want to produce more, think better, create with more depth, so start by protecting your space of silence. Create small rituals where the world is left out and only you are there, present. 5 minutes without your cell phone, 10 minutes of conscious breathing. A time to write, to walk. Without music, just to observe. It may not seem like much, but it is in these spaces that you recover your attention, that you take back control. And here is a difficult but necessary truth. Lack of focus is not a lack of discipline, it is excess noise. You do not need to demand more of yourself nor force yourself more. You need, first of all, to listen to yourself more. Because when you listen to yourself, you understand what is a priority. And when you understand the priority, everything else organizes itself around it. Silence is the starting point. It clears the ground, clarifies your vision, refines your direction, and, over time, what was chaotic becomes a path. Number 9. Silence as a path to self-sufficiency. Have you ever found yourself waiting for approval? Maybe you made the right decision but still wanted to hear someone say, "You did well." Maybe you experienced an important moment but only felt validated after receiving praise. Maybe you did something for yourself and still felt like showing it to someone. The need for recognition is one of the most silent prisons of the soul, and what often holds us back are not the visible chains, but the ones we have learned to carry without realizing it. The need to please, the need to justify, the need to depend on the gaze of others to feel complete. And this is where silence reveals its deepest role. It is a gateway to self-sufficiency. When you start spending time in silence, not just without speaking, but without seeking an answer from the outside, something changes. You stop depending on the echo of the world to know who you are. You stop chasing applause, likes, and agreement. You start building an inner center, a kind of solid ground where you stand even when the world is unstable. Stoicism teaches us to seek this foundation. Marcus Aurelius wrote almost as if he were praying to himself. The happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts, and what kind of thoughts emerge when you are constantly asking for permission to be you. Silence gives you back your autonomy, because in it, you learn to be your own parameter. You start to ask less what others think, and what's more, is this consistent with me? The external voice loses volume, the internal voice, previously muffled, begins to grow. And when this voice becomes stronger, you change. You start to dress for yourself, to work with purpose, to make choices with intention, and above all, to stop constantly seeking to be understood. Because those who live for explanations live dependent. Those who live for validation live tired. Silence breaks this cycle. It does not isolate you, it sustains you. In practice, this means making decisions without consulting the audience. It means facing difficult days without showing off. It means growing in silence, planting, watering, and waiting, without the anxiety of showing the sprout with each new step. You don't have to expose everything you think, nor share every victory, nor prove that you are right. Sometimes true growth happens where no one is looking, and that is when self-sufficiency blossoms, not as pride, but as freedom. You begin to realize that being at peace with your choices is more valuable than being applauded, than being completely silent. It is worth more than being popular in the noise. That living with purpose is stronger than living to be noticed. Of course, we are social beings. We need exchange, affection, listening. But one thing is to exchange, another is to depend. What silence teaches you is not to be held hostage by other people's opinions, to trust your own judgment, to respect your time, your process, your truth. That is when you learn to sustain yourself from the inside. No one else has the power to dismantle you from the outside. The next time you feel like showing something just to prove that you are okay, pause. Ask yourself, do I need people to see it? Or do I just need to know that I am on the right path? When you reach the point where you don't need to show it, it's because you already know, and who knows, you'll keep quiet. Because there's nothing more to say. Number 10. Silence as proof of emotional strength. Most people still believe that strength is making noise, speaking loudly, showing presence in every word, in every movement, as if firmness were linked to the tone of voice or the immediate response. But there is a strength that doesn't shout, a strength that doesn't impose itself, that doesn't need to win, because it has already understood that it's not in a dispute, and this strength is born from silence. Perhaps the greatest sign of emotional maturity is the ability to remain at peace, even when everything invites you to, as opposed to hearing a provocation and not reacting, to deal with frustration without exploding, to face injustice without becoming unfair, to feel everything and still choose what to do with it. And there is no shortcut to this. There is training. There is presence. There is silence. Epictetus said, "If you want to be good, first believe that it is possible and believe in it in practice, and refuse to be guided by your basest instincts and not fall into the trap of living, reacting like a cornered animal, always on edge, always in the heat of emotion. In silence, you create space between stimulus and response. And in this space, choice is born. You no longer respond. In impulse, you realize what you are feeling, understand what it means, and only then, if necessary, act with clarity, with direction, with real strength." Imagine the following. Someone accuses you unfairly, speaks loudly, points the finger, tries to destabilize you. What is the automatic reaction? Fight back. Defend yourself. Counterattack? But what if you take a deep breath, stay calm, look someone in the eye, and choose not to react? That is not cowardice. That is power, because you are not avoiding conflict. You are choosing not to be shaped by it. You are saying with your silence, "I am not controlled by your words. I am not here to dispute emotional territory." It is at this point that you stop being vulnerable to the chaos of others, because you know yourself. You support yourself. You have something to lean on. And here is the secret. Silence is not just a behavior. It is a state, an inner place where you do not need to prove, win, or convince, where you simply exist firmly. Of course, there are times when speaking is necessary, when silence would be omission. But these moments are rare in most everyday situations. Criticism, disagreements, and small conflicts do not require your full energy. They need your lucidity and lucidity. They only arise in silence. The Stoic is not cold. He feels everything, but chooses what to do with what he feels. He does not harden, he strengthens himself. And his strength is precisely this: feeling without being destroyed, being provoked without losing balance, listening without absorbing, keeping quiet without fading. The next time something bothers you or someone tries to take you out of your center, remember that you do not need to prove anything to anyone. Those who shout are not always right, and those who keep quiet are not always weak. Sometimes silence is the only response that carries real authority. Because when the storm passes, and it always does, those who maintained their balance will be remembered. Those who knew how to remain silent with dignity will be respected, and those who transformed their silence into strength will always be one step ahead. Number 11. Silence that breaks the cycle of reactivity. Have you ever noticed how many of your problems begin with a poorly thought-out response? Sometimes it is a word spoken at the wrong time, a comment, an impulsive statement, a hasty outburst that turns into a conflict, an unsolicited opinion that hurts, a judgment that escapes without filter. Then comes regret, exhaustion, weight, and everything. Why? Because you reacted automatically. Because there was no silence between what you felt and what you did. Most of us live like this, reacting to every stimulus, a response to every discomfort, an escape, every criticism, a defense, as if we were buttons being pressed all the time, with no space between the impact and the reaction. And that is where suffering lies. Not in what happens, but in how you respond to what happens. Silence in this scenario is like a pause key. It breaks the cycle. It creates a precious interval between the world and your reaction. And in this interval, freedom is born. Marcus Aurelius, who faced external and internal wars every day, wrote, "Calm is invincible." It seems simple, but think about the weight of it. Calm is not the absence of conflict, but emotional invulnerability. A calm that does not depend on the circumstances. A calm built, cultivated, trained, and fed day after day by silence. When you start practicing silence in the face of discomfort, something changes. You start to notice the triggers before they fire. You notice anger building, but you don't let it get the better of you. You feel anxiety growing, but you choose to breathe. You start to see the difference between what is yours and what is just trying to drag you to a place where you no longer want to go. And this perception is liberating, because it gives you back the choice. You are no longer a slave to provocation, no longer a hostage to your own haste. You can consciously decide when to speak, when to be silent, when to act, when to simply observe. This truly transforms your relationships. When you remain silent in the face of an attack, you avoid fueling the fire. When you listen without interrupting, you disarm the other person. When you wait before giving your opinion, your words gain weight. When you breathe before exploding, you save not only the moment, but often important bonds. Reactivity is the greatest thief of your emotional energy, and silence is the alarm that wakes you up in the middle of this theft. It reminds you that not everything needs to be answered, that not every annoyance needs to be voiced, that often what seems urgent is yours. A passing noise. The next time something irritates you, try this. Be silent. But an active, conscious, firm silence, not a silence that shrinks, but one that imposes itself. Breathe, wait, and see what happens inside you. See how emotion loses strength when it finds no echo. See how you get back on track when you don't give in to impulse. This is how the end of reactivity begins. It's the beginning of a life with more presence, more control, more lightness. Silence is not omission, it's sovereignty. It's you saying with your calm, "I decide how I'm going to respond." Life. This is freedom. Number 12. The silence that reveals the essential. We live surrounded by excess. Too much information, too much stimulus, too much urgency, too many voices. Everyone telling you what you should do, feel, follow. What is success? What is failure? What is right? What is wrong? And then you find yourself trying to do everything. Being productive, successful, interesting, balanced, intelligent, available, up to date, all at the same time. It's as if there were an invisible manual telling you what you need to be accepted. But accepted by whom? There comes a time when this search is exhausted, and it is at this point that silence becomes more than a breath of fresh air. It becomes a sieve, a filter, a lens that separates what is essential from what is noise. In silence, you begin to see what was there all along. but covered by excess what really matters. What is yours? What remains when the noise passes? Seneca wrote, "He is rich who is content with little, but it is only possible to know what is little enough when you stop being bombarded by much. And for this, silence is indispensable. It does not just cleanse, it reveals. It is in silence that you realize that perhaps you are fighting for things you never wanted, that perhaps you are trapped in expectations that are not even yours, that perhaps the lifestyle you have been trying to achieve does not match your nature. You begin to feel deep down that perhaps you do not need to be everything, nor for everyone. This, my friend, is an immense relief. You do not need to please everyone. You do not need to prove anything. You do not need to go with the flow just because it is the fullest. In silence, you realize that there are slower, calmer, lighter paths, and that these paths may be the truest ones. But be careful. Finding the essential does not mean abandoning everything. It is knowing how to choose. It is looking at your routine, your habits, your desires, and asking yourself honestly, is this mine, or is it noise? And you will only be able to ask this question when you silence the world for a few moments. When you turn off the comparison, when you stop rushing to observe where you are really stepping. Silence is also uncomfortable because it takes away the distractions that numb you. But after the initial anxiety comes something precious, clarity. You start to say no more easily, to say yes with more intention. You start to feel pleasure in the simple. You start to see beauty in the routine. You start to value what you already have instead of living hungry for what is still missing. It is silence that reconnects you with what is real. In practice, this means reviewing your goals, reducing your commitments, taking time out of your day just to feel, canceling the rush to be extraordinary and starting to be whole. Because in the end, what destroys is not the mistake, it is the excess. And what heals is not the right thing, it is the essential. Silence is the place where this essential thing reveals itself, not with fuss, but with lightness. Not with ready-made answers, but with space. So if you give space not as a luxury, but as a necessity, be silent, observe, feel, and you will realize that everything that seemed vital was just noise. Number 13, the silence that deepens connections. We learned that connections are made by saying that good relationships are built with constant dialogue, intense exchange, active presence. And yes, words have their value. Conversations heal, build, align. But there is something that almost no one teaches. Silence is also language, and sometimes it is the one that speaks the loudest. Think of a simple scene, two people sitting without saying anything but comfortable, without anxiety, without the need to fill the void, in no rush to escape the moment. Their presence, their synchronized breathing, their peace of not needing to perform. This is intimacy. This is trust. Because the silence between two people can say, I am here completely without a mask. You can say, I don't need to talk all the time to be seen. You can say, I feel safe by your side, even without saying anything. The Stoic understands that silence does not distance. It reveals. It reveals the level of the relationship and reveals whether there is comfort or discomfort, whether real presence or just convenience. Because where there is forced noise, the disconnection disguised as closeness is greater. Silence also shows who is truly listening. There are people who just wait their turn to speak, who respond before even listening, who see the conversation as a duel, not as a bridge. And in these cases, the more you talk, the more you distance yourself because you are not heard or analyzed. But when someone listens to you in silence, without rushing to give their opinion, without judgment in their eyes, with full attention, you feel your body relax, your speech change, your soul surrender. Because there is space there is presence there. Marco Aurelio wrote, "Listen carefully, even those who have little to say." This phrase is not about tolerance, it is about wisdom. Because everyone, at some point, is saying something that needs to be accepted, even if poorly formulated, even if timid, even if incomplete. This only happens when there is silence between you and the other person. But there is also another side, more intimate, the silence within the bonds themselves. Because there is also the silence that heals, the silence that respects, the silence that protects. Sometimes it is not the time to talk. It is the time to give space, to not force the conversation, to allow the other person to experience their pain in their own time. There are bonds that are strengthened in the pause. There are affections that grow in the retreat. And there is also the silence that says it all. When a look replaces a speech, when a touch communicates more than 1,000 justifications, when the unsaid becomes truer than any explanation. In the rush to resolve, sometimes we mess up. In the eagerness to clarify, we confuse. In our desperation to speak, we distance ourselves. Do you want deeper relationships? Then learn to sustain silence without anxiety. Learn to listen more, to observe what is behind the speech, to respect the other person's time without invading with words. And above all, learn to be silent with someone and still feel completely connected, because when presence is real, silence does not separate. It unites. Number 14. The power of choosing the right moment to speak. Have you ever realized how many words you use in a day? How many times do you feel compelled to speak, to give your opinion, to justify? In a world where communication is constantly stimulated, we often end up saying things that do not need to be said, or talking too much, when simpler things would be enough. The truth is that sometimes, speaking is the easiest thing to do. Silence, on the other hand, requires wisdom, discernment, and the knowledge that not every situation requires a verbal response. Do you know that moment when you feel the urge to give your opinion, to share what you think, to express your perspective on something? This is the moment of greatest fragility, because it is often an impulse that the ego reveals itself. It is when we do not think that words come out without control, in excess or out of context. And why does this happen? Because deep down, many of us still believe that the value of our words is directly linked to the quantity of them. We talk too much to be heard, to feel important, to fill the void of an uncomfortable moment. But what would happen if you started asking yourself, do I need to talk now? Does this really add value to the conversation? This is the turning point. Silence, as a practice, teaches you that it is not always necessary to fill the gaps with words. Sometimes, the greatest strength lies in waiting, in listening, in noticing what was not said, in recognizing what the situation demands before acting or speaking. Marcus Aurelius, the wise emperor and master of self-control, said, "The word is the reflection of our character." In other words, the words spoken reveal who we are, what we are thinking, and most importantly, what we want from others. When we choose to speak at the right time with intention, our words become an act of wisdom. But when we speak without thinking, just to fill the void, we become hostages to what we say. Have you ever noticed how some people stand out for their ability to speak as little as possible, but still have an undeniable presence? They don't talk more, they talk better, they don't rush to give answers, but the answers they give carry depth. This is the power of choice, the power of knowing when to speak and when to be silent. When you master this, you put yourself in control of the situation. Your words gain weight because they come from a place of wisdom and not impulse. They are measured, thought out, precise. And when you decide when to speak, you don't become a slave to circumstances or the expectations of others. And what's most incredible about all this, silence doesn't diminish you. On the contrary, it puts you at the center of the situation. It allows you to observe, understand, and when the time is right, act or speak with more clarity, more authority. The next time you feel pressured to give a quick answer, stop, breathe, ask yourself if this will really add anything. Will it add value to the situation, or will it just feed the noise? And you will realize that, over time, choosing the right moment to speak not only makes you wiser, but also more respected. Because words don't need to be constant to be powerful. Sometimes true strength comes from pausing, from being patient, from knowing. When you don't say anything, you don't need to prove anything to anyone. Your presence, your silence, and your well-chosen words speak for you. Number 15. The freedom that arises when you keep quiet. Imagine a day where you don't need to explain your choices, where no one pressures you to justify your actions, where there is no pressure on your actions or the need to show at all times that you are busy, important, or fulfilling this scenario. It seems like a distant dream, doesn't it? But perhaps the key to this silent freedom is closer than you think. The truth is that our lives often become a great spectacle. We are invited to constantly show off to others, to ourselves, even to the virtual world. Our every action needs to be recorded, shared, commented on. And this cycle, although engaging, imprisons us, turns us into hostages of constant validation. The need to be seen, to be recognized, creates an invisible pressure that prevents us from living freely. But this is true freedom. It's not about what you show, but about what you don't show. Silence has this capacity. It's the freedom of not having to explain yourself. It's the freedom of not having to justify yourself, of not being held hostage by other people's opinions, of not having to worry about shaping your image all the time. Silence gives you back the power to exist without needing approval. Epictetus, with his practical wisdom, wrote about what is beyond your control. Don't worry. And how many times do we worry precisely because we try to control other people's perceptions, because we try to make everyone understand our choices, see the value in what we do, and approve of our way of being? Silence, in turn, is the liberation from all this. It doesn't require explanations. It simply is. It allows you to make your choices without looking back, without worrying about the eyes watching you or the pressure to prove something. And when you keep quiet, you begin to realize how much other people's opinions have a disproportionate weight in your life. You start to question, why do I need to prove that I'm on the right path? Why this constant search for recognition? You realize that true freedom does not come from asserting yourself to the world, but from asserting yourself to yourself and knowing that you are enough, even without applause, even without attentive eyes. Silence in this case is not a void, but a space for recovery and reconnection. It allows you to be with yourself, without external distractions, without the expectations that the world places on your shoulders. And in doing so, you find yourself not in what you do, but in who you are. And the liberating thing about all this is that when you give yourself this space, you not only find inner peace, but you also begin to make stronger, more authentic decisions, more aligned with who you really are. You are no longer at the mercy of external influences. Your life begins to be guided by your own wisdom and your own inner voice, which can only be heard in silence. The next time you feel the pressure to speak, to explain, to justify your actions, stop, breathe, ask yourself, is this really important? Am I doing this because it is what I want, or because I am trying to please others? If you stop and allow yourself to be silent, you will realize that much of what you think is essential simply is not. And by letting go of this need, you find true freedom, the freedom to be who you are, without constraints, without false expectations, without the weight of judgment. Because freedom is like silence, it does not need to be announced. It simply exists, and when you recognize it, you live fully. Number 16. How does silence transform conflict into growth? When you enter into conflict, what are you really trying to win? To defend your point of view. To prove that you are right. In many cases, our first reaction is to want to assert ourselves, to want to respond in kind. But what would happen if you looked at conflict from another perspective? Not as a battle to be won, but as an opportunity to grow. Silence has this power. It transforms conflict. Instead of fueling the fight, it offers the chance for reflection, learning, and empathy. When you choose to remain silent, you are not giving in. You are strengthening your position, because you are giving yourself time to understand what is really happening and not just reacting automatically. In everyday life, most conflicts arise from impatience. You are provoked and you immediately respond without even realizing the real intentions behind the words. Silence, then, is the pause that allows you to see beyond the words. It is the ability to see the root of the conflict, understand its causes, realize that what is at stake may be deeper than simply being right. It is interesting how Stoicism deals with this. Epictetus, in his wisdom, reminds us that it is not events that disturb us, but the opinions we have about them. In other words, conflict is not a problem in itself, but the way we react to it. When you react impulsively, you only reinforce the cycle of reactivity and disagreements. But silence interrupts this cycle. It seems strange to think that by keeping quiet you can be winning, but that is exactly what it is. Silence in the midst of a conflict puts you in a position of power. The power to choose your response, to observe without judging, to listen before speaking. It gives you space to reflect, and often the best response is the one that is not given immediately. I am not saying that silence is always the answer. There are times when it is necessary to speak, to take a stand, to defend what is fair. But in most cases, silence gives you the discernment necessary to do so wisely. It helps you to distinguish what is really worth saying and what is just emotional noise. What's more, silence in the midst of conflict also opens the door to empathy. When you keep quiet, you begin to listen not only to what the other person is saying, but also to what they are truly feeling. You begin to realize that often, what is behind anger or aggression is not a personal attack, but rather a pain or frustration that is not clearly expressed. Now imagine the impact of this. Instead of reacting to the attack, you respond with understanding. Instead of reinforcing the discord, you open the door to understanding. This is the true power of silence. It not only gives you control over your own emotions, but it also transforms the dynamics of the conflict, making it fertile ground for mutual growth. The next time a conflict arises, try taking a step back. Breathe. Don't let yourself be swept away by the first emotion that comes your way. Observe what is happening, what the other person is really saying, and what you are telling yourself about what is happening. Silence offers you the opportunity to do this, to not fall into the trap of reactivity, and to transform the conflict not into a defeat, but into a learning experience. When you calm down and become silent, you have the chance to see the conflict as an opportunity for personal growth. You emerge stronger, more centered, wiser, and often the other person emerges transformed as well. Because silence creates a space where true communication can happen, where ego does not dictate the rules, and where understanding and respect can flourish. Silence is not a weakness. It is true strength, because it is the choice not to be swept away by the tide. It is the choice to be bigger than the conflict. And when you do that, you truly grow. Number 17. Silence as the path to truth. In a world where we are constantly bombarded by external opinions, information, and expectations, the truth becomes something difficult to find. It becomes obscured by the noise of the voices around us, by the pressure to be something we are not, by the constant comparison with others. And in the midst of all this, the question arises, where is the truth? How do we know what is real? What is genuine? What is truly ours? This is where the power of silence comes in. Silence is not just the absence of sound. It is a space for reflection, introspection, and self-discovery. When you allow yourself a moment of stillness, you begin to hear your own voice, the one that is there all the time, but that is often drowned out by the noise of the outside world. And it is in that moment, when you become silent and listen carefully, that you come closer to the truth. The truth is not something that someone can give you. It is not a ready-made formula. It is not an idea that you read or hear and adopt as your own. The true and profound truth is something that you discover within yourself with clarity and authenticity. And this process requires silence. It is in silence that you begin to understand what really matters to you, what you really want, what moves you, what makes you feel alive. Instead of following what others define as right, you begin to define your own parameters. You find your own voice that may have been lost in the midst of so much noise. Seneca, the great Stoic philosopher, said, "True freedom is being able to live according to one's own nature. And to live according to one's true nature, it is necessary to listen to the noise of external expectations. It is a distortion that prevents you from hearing your own inner wisdom. Silence, therefore, is the path to the freedom to be who you really are." Is this silence uncomfortable? Yes, it can be scary because it demands honesty. When you are silent, you come face to face with your fears, your doubts, your insecurities. And that is precisely why many are afraid to face what is stored in the back of their minds. without the distractions and escapism that noise offers. But this is the only way to find true freedom. By looking within, by silencing the outside world and listening to the truths that are there waiting to be discovered, not the truth that others impose. Isn't it true that social media wants you to accept, but your own truth? That, my friend, is an exercise in courage. In silence, you have the opportunity to undo the lies you tell yourself. Maybe you've believed for years that you have to be someone you're not, or that you have to follow a path that isn't yours. Silence allows you to see this and start making choices that are more aligned with your true essence. And the most wonderful thing about it all is that when you find your truth in silence, you become stronger, not because you need to prove yourself, but because you already know who you are. And this brings peace, because you no longer need to seek external validation. Your silent and powerful truth is enough. So the next time you feel pressured to conform to other people's expectations or to act on impulse, stop, breathe, and take some time to listen to yourself. Ask yourself, am I doing what is true for me? Or am I just trying to please others? Silence offers you the chance to find that answer, and when you find it, life becomes lighter, simpler, and truer. Because the truth never shouts, it whispers. Deep down, in silence. I sincerely hope that this message has been useful. I want to sincerely congratulate you for getting this far and completing the video. This means that you want to improve as a person. If you liked the video, leave a comment. If you don't know what to comment, comment. Thank you. That way, I will know that you watched until the end. If you are not yet subscribed to the channel, what are you waiting for? Subscribe now and join us. Stoicism is full of teachings like this that are applicable to our daily lives. Therefore, I encourage you to continue learning about this philosophy. Here are 2 videos full of Stoic wisdom so that you can continue learning. Until next time.